Have you ever wondered how a teenage concubine, a woman who has an affair with a married man, could rise from being completely unknown to become the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor? Well, the answer isn't luck or even being in the right political party. Instead, Wei became a master of a deadly game of palace intrigue. This is a game that would make modern politicians look like amateurs. He systematically eliminated rivals and manipulated 3 different emperors to claim ultimate power. So, in this journey through ancient China, I'm going to reveal how Wei transformed from a powerless servant girl into the most feared ruler in Chinese history, using her intelligence, ambition, and perfect timing. This amazing story covers many years of secret plans in the royal palace, family betrayals, and political killings that changed the whole royal family. I'm going to explain how she got so powerful. By the time you finish this series, you'll know exactly how she did it. To really understand why Wei has become so successful, we need to look at the world she was born into. It was the year 624 CE, during the early Tang dynasty, when China was doing really well and achieving a lot in terms of culture and business. The capital of the Tang dynasty, Chang'an, was the largest city in the world. This place has more than 1 million people from lots of different cultures and kingdoms. People traveled long distances to bring exotic goods to the Silk Road. These goods came from places as far away as Persia and Rome. Buddhist temples were built next to both Buddhist and Taoist shrines, as well as Confucian temples. During the imperial period, art, poetry, and scholarship all thrived. But behind the shiny exterior, there was a society built on strict social ranks and a world where men had total power. In the Confucian social order, the emperor was at the top, then government officials, farmers, artisans, and merchants. Women didn't have any power of their own. They were defined by their relationships to men, like as daughters, wives, or mothers. The most important thing for a woman was to have sons who would make her family name proud. The idea of women wanting to be successful was not just not allowed, it was literally not possible to think it. Wu Zetian was born as Wu Jiao, the daughter of Wu Yihua, a rich man who sold wood and helped the Tang dynasty become powerful. Her family background was unusual for someone who would later enter the imperial court. Most concubines came from well-known aristocratic families who had been part of the court for many generations. The Wu family were rich and powerful merchants. The traditional nobility looked down on them because they came from a long line of nobles. It was normal for rich men to have more than one wife, and Wu Shiho was no exception. Wujia's mother, Lady Yang, was his second wife, which meant that Wujia had a difficult position in the family. She was the rightful owner, but not the main heir. Her dad's first wife's older half-brothers would inherit the family business and properties. This early experience of having to compete for attention and resources in a complex family structure would be really helpful when she later started working in imperial politics, which was even more difficult. Even as a child, Wu Jiao was clever and determined. This made her different from other girls her age. While most daughters of wealthy families were taught only how to look after a home, Wujia was lucky enough to receive a much broader education. Historical records suggest that her father, perhaps recognizing her exceptional abilities, allowed her to study alongside her brothers. She learned to read and write classical Chinese, studied history and philosophy, and even received training in mathematics and basic military strategy. This education was very new for a girl of her time. Most women, even aristocratic ones, were basically illiterate. In the past, people thought that reading and writing were things that men did, and that if a woman was good at these things, she might be too independent and therefore not get married. But Wu Jiao learned quickly, developing not just literacy, but real intellectual sophistication that would later allow her to debate with court scholars and write her own imperial edicts. She was also very beautiful, but descriptions from that time must be understood in the context of the political propaganda of the later years. People say that she was very beautiful, with perfect skin, nice features, and a strong personality. This made her stand out in any crowd. But more importantly, she had what Chinese historians call dragon phoenix charisma. This is when someone has an almost supernatural ability to command attention and inspire both loyalty and fear in those around them. Wu Jiao's childhood came to an end in 636 when her father died suddenly. She was only 12 years old when he died, and his death had a big effect on her family. According to Chinese laws about inheritance, Wu Hor's oldest son got his family business and properties from his first wife. Wu Jiao, her mother, and her younger brothers and sisters had to rely on their half-brothers, who were not very supportive. This experience of feeling powerless and worried about money would have a big effect on Wu's way of thinking. She learned firsthand how quickly things could change and how vulnerable women were in a system that offered them no legal or economic rights. Instead of accepting her difficult situation, she started making plans to leave her life of poverty and dependence. The chance came in 638 when Emperor Tang asked for beautiful young women to join his royal band. This was a normal thing for Chinese courts to do, where the emperor had hundreds of concubines, secret wives, and they were organized into different levels. For most families, having a daughter chosen as an imperial concubine was seen as a great honor that could raise the whole family status. For Wu Jiao, it was even more important because it gave her the chance to escape the limitations of her birth and enter the center of political power. When she was 14, Wu Jiao was chosen from thousands of other people to become a fifth-rank concubine. This meant she was given the title Kiren, which means talented person. This was not a very high rank in the complicated list of imperial women's ranks, but was enough to get her into the Forbidden City and near the most powerful man in China. The imperial harem was a world in itself. It was a complicated system of competition, alliances, and secret plots. This made the outside political world look simple by comparison. Hundreds of women lived in very big apartments with lots of servants. But most people would never even meet the emperor, let alone be his children or have an influence on what he does. Most of them would live out their lives in golden captivity, forgotten and irrelevant. Emperor Tang, who was born Lysiman, was one of the best rulers in Chinese history. He had helped his father set up the Tang dynasty and had personally led military campaigns that made China bigger than it had ever been. He was intelligent, well-read, and really wanted to make sure the country was well governed. But he was also a middle-aged man with lots of wives and girlfriends, so it was unlikely he would pay much attention to a teenage girl. Wu Jiao understood this challenge straight away when she arrived at the palace. Other concubines relied solely on their beauty or tried to attract the emperor's attention through traditional feminine accomplishments. But she took a completely different approach. She made herself useful. She had an unusual education and started helping with office work that other concubines did not want to do. She could read and write better than many court officials and understood how the bureaucracy worked. When the emperor needed documents copied or letters translated, Wu Jiao offered to help. When he wanted someone to read to him from historical texts, she was available with perfect pronunciation and insightful commentary. What's more, she started to study the emperor like a scholar looking at old books. She learned what he liked, how he was feeling, what he was worried about, and what made him anxious. While the other mistresses tried to entertain him, Wu Jiao made herself indispensable by becoming his intellectual companion and trusted advisor. This strategy required a lot of patience and self-control. Wu Jiao spent a long time getting to know the emperor. She also watched the palace politics around her very closely. She identified the most important people, understood the divisions among court officials, and began to build her own network of allies among servants, eunuchs, and minor officials who had access to valuable information. The imperial court was divided into many different groups who competed with each other. These groups were based on where they were from, what they believed in, and who they were loyal to. The most powerful group was made up of the founding families who had helped establish the Tang dynasty and felt they deserved to have a permanent influence. These aristocratic groups looked down on newcomers like Wu Jiao and tried to stop the emperor from promoting people from outside their group. Wu Jiao quickly realized that her background as a merchant, which had seemed like a disadvantage, was actually a strength in this environment. She didn't belong to any particular groups, so she could move between them without being seen as an enemy. She also understood commerce and economics better than the aristocratic officials who thought trade was beneath them. As time went on, Wujia became more and more important to Emperor Tang. She started off copying documents, then she moved on to drafting them. She went from reading historical texts to discussing their political implications, and from listening to court debates to offering her own opinions. The emperor, who had first seen her as just another pretty face in his harem, began to recognize her exceptional intelligence and to rely on her judgment. But Wujia wanted more than to be the emperor's secret lover. She knew that, even though she had a good job, she might lose it at any moment. If the emperor changed his mind, these eunuchs could be sent away. Sometimes they were sent to live in remote temples. She needed to build a more lasting power base, which meant expanding her influence beyond her personal relationship with the emperor. She started building relationships with the emperor's children, especially his successor, Prince Linkan. This was risky because there was a strict rule in the court that meant the mistress and the emperor's son couldn't meet. But Wu Jiao was careful to make her interactions about teaching and management, not personal relationships. She offered to help with the prince's letters, gave information about court politics, and slowly became useful to the future emperor as well as the current one. Unfortunately, Wu Jiao's careful training of Prince Li Cheng was a mistake that almost ended her political career before it had even started. The prince was supposed to be the next in line to the throne, but he was finding it hard to stay calm and reliable as an ally in politics. Li Cheng'an had grown up under a lot of pressure as the heir to the world's most powerful empire. Court officials looked very closely at every part of his life. His teachers strictly controlled his education. He felt a lot of pressure to be a good emperor when he grew up. But the prince didn't meet these expectations. He started rebelling in dangerous ways. He became fascinated by Turkish culture, adopting their clothing, customs, and even their military tactics. People thought this was very wrong for a future Chinese emperor, especially because the Tang dynasty was fighting Turkish tribes on the northern border. Even more worryingly, Lincoln started hanging out with bad influences and acting in a way that observers thought was not right for someone in his position. Wu Jiao was worried about what was happening. Her political instincts told her that the prince's strange behavior was making him vulnerable to his enemies at court. This also made her vulnerable. She had spent a lot of time and effort getting to know him, but now that investment was becoming a problem. Things got really bad in Sixth Form 3 when Prince Li Cheng'an was involved in a plot to assassinate his father and seize the throne before his time. The plot was discovered before it could be carried out. But the fact that the crown prince had taken part in such a scheme sent shockwaves through the imperial court. Emperor Tang was devastated by his son's betrayal and immediately started investigating everyone who had been associated with the prince. Wu Jiao was in a very dangerous situation. It was clear that she had strong links to Lin Kan, and many court officials thought that she might be working with the prince to cause trouble. The investigation that followed was very careful and cruel. Many people were questioned, tortured, and killed for their suspected roles in the plot. But Wu Jiao's years of careful observation and relationship building now paid unexpected dividends. She had contacts with officials from different groups, and some of them spoke up for her during the investigation. Even more importantly, the emperor thought highly of her because she was useful to him and she was a good companion. Emperor Tong decided that Wu Jiao had been naive, not treacherous, in her relationship with the disgraced prince. She had been used by Lin Can rather than using him, a victim of his manipulation rather than working with him to rebel. This meant that the emperor could carry on seeing Wu Jiao without feeling upset about his son's betrayal. The prince conspiracy crisis taught Wu Jiao several important lessons about palace politics. These lessons would guide her future actions. First, she learned that even if you have a good reason to support someone, it can still be very bad for you. Political plans that seemed sensible could be completely changed by something unexpected happening or a problem with someone's character. Second, she realized how important it is to keep good relationships with people who have different views. She had to have allies in different groups who could vouch for her character and usefulness, not just one group. Most importantly, Wujia realized that she could only feel safe by being part of the imperial system, not by being with a person, no matter how powerful they were. She had to become so useful, knowledgeable, and connected that getting rid of her would be more costly than protecting her. After Prince Lai Chainan was stripped of his rank and sent away, Emperor Tong chose his ninth son, Lai Ji, to be the new crown prince. Lai Ji was very different from his predecessor. He is studious, respects tradition, and is genuinely committed to preparing himself for imperial responsibilities. But he was also young, had little experience, and felt stressed because people expected a lot of him. Wujia saw an opportunity in the new crown princess situation. Her relationship with Lai Chun had been based on personal charm and helping with administration. But she would approach Li in a more strategic and carefully planned way. She would make sure he was ready to become emperor. She began by studying Li's personality, interests, and weaknesses in the same careful way she had studied his father. The young prince was clever, but he did not trust his own judgment. He knew a lot about classical texts, but he didn't have much experience of the difficult parts of running a huge empire. Most importantly, he had advisors who either weren't able to give him honest advice or were so busy following their own agendas that they didn't care about what he wanted. Wu Jiao was able to become a valuable part of the advisory ecosystem, offering unique insights that were not available from other sources. She shared information about what was happening behind the scenes at the court, which the prince's teachers were not allowed to talk about. She gave honest opinions on policy suggestions that his sycophantic followers would never criticize. She also started to act as a bridge between Lu and the real world outside the palace. As the daughter of a merchant, she had experienced poverty and uncertainty. This gave her a unique understanding of the practical effects of imperial policies that aristocratic advisors, who had always been wealthy, simply could not. This plan meant that Wu Jiao had to be very careful. She needed to be useful to the crown prince to get his protection and support, but not so involved in his affairs that she would be seen as trying to take advantage of him. She had to show that she was loyal and wise, but also that she was humble. Things got even more complicated when Emperor Tong's health started to get worse in the late 640s. The emperor was in his 50s and tired after decades of fighting wars and running the country. He was showing signs of age and illness, which made it more important than ever to decide who would be the next emperor. Court officials started getting ready for the change to a new emperor, and the competition to have influence with the future emperor got a lot stronger. Wu found herself caught between two different groups of people with a lot of power. The old imperial court was centered around Emperor Tong, where she had spent years building her position. The new court of Crown Prince Li Ju was also important, where she was working to establish new relationships and influence. Managing both relationships at the same time required great diplomatic skill and political intelligence. She had to keep showing the current emperor that she was useful to him while also gaining the trust of his successor. She did this without seeming unfaithful or selfish, which could have hurt her relationship with either man. This challenge was made more difficult because even though the father and son liked and respected each other, they had different personalities, different ideas about what was important to them, and different ways of thinking that sometimes meant they did not agree with each other. Emperor Tang was a warrior and scholar. He had personally led armies and conquered territories. He believed in taking action, being brave, and having strong leadership. He was a practical and realistic leader, using the experience he gained as a military commander to make quick decisions based on incomplete information. Crown Prince Li Ji was more thoughtful and careful. He liked to think about problems really carefully before doing anything, to talk to lots of different people before making decisions, and to think about what would happen in the long term because of the things he did, instead of just thinking about the results that he could see right away. He was more collaborative and systematic than his father, but also potentially slower and more indecisive. Wu Jiao changed her approach depending on each man's personality and what he liked. With Emperor Tang, she focused on practical solutions and immediate benefits. She gave information in a clear way, offered clear recommendations, and showed how her suggestions matched the things he was already doing. She spoke to him in a direct, confident, and focused way, and always aimed to get results. With Crown Prince Li Ji, she was more careful. She talked about the different sides of difficult issues, admitted that things might not go as planned, and said that it was important to get all the different groups on the same page before making big changes. Her way of interacting with him was more varied and cooperative. She helped him make decisions, not by pushing for certain results, but by offering him information and support. This worked really well for a while, because it let Wuzhou make her position stronger with the current and future emperor. It also meant that she could avoid the arguments that destroyed many other important people in the court during this kind of situation. But it also created new problems that would soon put her political skills to the test. As Emperor Tang got worse and worse, rumors started to spread about an inappropriate relationship between Wu Jiao and Crown Prince Li Ju. It was probably to be expected that rumors would spread, given the amount of time they spent together and the obvious intelligence and ambition that Wu Jiao displayed. In a society where women were seen as sexual objects rather than political players, any interaction between a beautiful mistress and a young prince would be seen as romantic. The rumors were particularly dangerous because they broke the important rules about who should be the next emperor. Concubines were the emperor's mistresses and were expected to be loyal to him alone. If a concubine was seen to be getting close to someone who could potentially take the throne, it could be seen as treason or adultery. Even if the relationship was just political and admin, the appearance of impropriety could be enough to destroy everyone involved. Wu Jiao realized that the position she had carefully built up was no longer possible. She could not keep getting more powerful with Li Ju without risking accusations that could lead to her being killed. But she also couldn't give up her investment in the future emperor without risking the security and power she had worked so hard to achieve. The solution she came up with was bold and risky. Instead of trying to hide or make her relationship with the crown prince seem less important, Wu Jia decided to completely change the way people thought about it. She would change what seemed like a weak point into a strong point by changing the main points of the discussion. In early 649, as Emperor Tang lay dying, Wu Jiao made a decision that would change Chinese history. Instead of waiting for things to happen, She chose to take control of her own life in a way that no other woman in Chinese history had ever done. But that amazing risk and its even more amazing results would have to wait for the emperor's death and the start of a completely new stage in Wuho's never-ending quest for ultimate power. The death of Emperor Tang in 649 CE marked the end of an era and the beginning of Wu's most dangerous gamble yet. According to ancient Chinese tradition, when an emperor died, his mistresses were usually given one of two choices. They could be buried alive with their master to serve him in the afterlife, or they could have their heads shaved and spend the rest of their lives as Buddhist nuns in remote monasteries. Neither option offered any possibility of keeping their political influence or personal freedom. For most of these women, this meant the end of any luxury or importance they might have had. They would fade into obscurity, be forgotten by history, and have no impact on the future of the empire. But Wu Jiao had spent over 10 years getting ready for this moment, and she was not going to accept her fate. The funeral of Emperor Tang was a grand event that lasted for months. His body was put on display in the beautiful Daming Palace, and officials from all over the empire went to Chang'an to show respect. Buddhist monks sang prayers for his soul. Scholars of Confucius wrote long speeches about what he had done, and priests of Taoism did rituals to make sure he would have a peaceful journey to the afterlife. Wu Jiao took part in these ceremonies in the right way, showing the sadness and devotion that was expected of a royal mistress. She wore the white robes of mourning, cried at the right times, and followed all the complicated rules about how to behave during the long funeral. To people from outside, she looked like just another sad woman ready to accept her fate as a useless relic of the old regime. But behind the scenes, Wu Jiao was making the most daring political move in Chinese history. During the chaotic weeks between the emperor's death and his successor's formal coronation, she was secretly communicating with Crown Prince Li, who was preparing to become Emperor Gaozong. These messages were very dangerous. Any contact between a dead emperor's mistress and his successor could be seen as proof of an affair that had started while Tang was still alive. We don't know what was in these messages, but we know they had an effect. Instead of letting Wu Jiao go to a monastery as was customary, the new Emperor Gaozong stepped in to change her fate. Using his authority as the new ruler, he said that Wu Jiao's administrative skills and intellectual abilities were too valuable to waste on religious thinking. He announced that she would be invited back to the imperial court to work for him. This decision shocked the whole imperial establishment. This was the first time a Chinese emperor had asked his father's mistress to work for him. The situation was not just unusual, it was completely unexpected. Court officials were shocked by what they saw as a violation of the basic moral principles that governed how the empire behaved. Buddhist monks were shocked by the emperor's apparent lack of respect for religious traditions. Even ordinary people throughout the empire talked about the young emperor's strange decision to surround himself with his father's former women. But Emperor Gaozong wasn't acting without thinking. He was a thoughtful, methodical ruler who had spent years watching Wu Jiao and understanding how valuable she could be to his government. His father, however, had been an experienced military commander and seasoned politician when he took power. In contrast, Gaozong was a young man with limited practical experience in governance when he became emperor. The Tang Empire had a lot of problems in 649 that needed to be fixed right away. Turkish tribes were attacking the northern border. The Korean kingdoms were fighting against China's influence in the peninsula, and there were rebellions in several provinces. The government was controlled by powerful families who were part of the aristocracy. These families had their own plans and did not always support the new emperor. Managing these complex problems required advisors who were skilled and completely dependent on the emperor's favor for their position and security. Wuja is exactly what we're looking for. She had shown that she was intelligent and good at organizing things, while working for Emperor Tang for many years. Her background as a merchant meant she had no independent power base that might compete with the authority of the empire. Most importantly, her return to court, which many people did not agree with, meant that she was completely dependent on Emperor Gaozong to keep her safe. She couldn't survive in politics without his support, which meant she was loyal in a way that traditional aristocratic advisors could never match. The emperor's decision to recall Wu Jiao was both personal and political. He was bringing back a woman he trusted and found interesting, but he was also getting a very valuable political asset who could help him in the difficult early years of his reign. Wu Jie returned to the imperial court in 650, not as a mistress, but as something completely new in Chinese history. A woman who works for the government and has real responsibilities in administration and politics. She had a simple official title, but her role was actually much more important. She was able to speak to the emperor directly, take part in discussions about the country's policies, and start to have a big influence on important decisions about how the country was governed and its relationships with other countries. Her first big challenge was to gain the trust of the people who worked in the court system. Most of them thought that her appointment was a bad idea. They thought it went against traditional ideas of gender and government procedures. These officials had spent their whole careers climbing through levels of the army based on tests, family connections, and which group they belonged to. The sudden appearance of a woman who had the power to make decisions and was able to influence policy threatened their understanding of how government was supposed to work. Wu Jiao dealt with this opposition in the smart and patient way that he was known for. Instead of trying to go up against the people in charge, she found ways to work with them. She started by using her special skills to get an advantage over the officials who were not sure about her. For example, her experience as the daughter of a merchant gave her an understanding of trade and economic policy that aristocratic officials did not have. When people were debating about taxes, business rules, or building projects, Wu Jiao could give useful advice based on what he had actually done in the past, not just what he thought he knew. Her suggestions were often better than those of officials who only understood economics from old books. She also used the fact that she had spent years watching and getting to know people in the imperial court to become an extremely useful source of information about the different groups of officials and the rivalries between them. Emperor Gaozong, like any ruler, needed to understand the complicated relationships and disagreements within his administration. This was necessary to make effective decisions about his staff and to prevent plots against him. Wu Jiao knew a lot about court politics, which made her very useful. She also started to act as a bridge between the emperor and different groups of people that traditional advisors found hard to understand or communicate with effectively. Because she came from a simple background, she was able to speak up for the concerns of ordinary people like merchants, farmers, and artisans. This was something that aristocratic officials could not do. Her gender gave her access to information about the imperial harem and the concerns of court women that male advisors never heard. This approach, which had many sides to it, made Wu Jiao an important member of Emperor Gaozong's inner circle. People in charge who had said no to her getting the job started to see how good she was and asked for her help with their own plans. Leaders of groups who had thought she was not one of them started seeing her as someone who could help them get what they wanted by talking to the emperor. But Wu Jiao was becoming more powerful in the political world, and this created new dangers for her. The more important she became to the emperor's government, the more threatening she appeared to the people in charge, who had reasons to limit her authority. The most dangerous opposition came from the empress and the imperial in-laws, who had expected to dominate the new reign. Empress Wang had married Lai Ju several years before he became emperor, and she thought that this would make her important in the court. As the ruler's wife, She should have been the most important woman in the empire. She would have had authority over the imperial household and informal influence over policy decisions affecting women and family matters. Instead, Empress Wang found herself being ignored more and more by Wu Jiao because of the growing influence she had over her husband. The emperor spent more time talking about government business with Wu Jiao than he did talking about personal things with his official wife. People watching the court noticed that Wu Jiao's suggestions were more important for the emperor's decisions than the empress's. This was embarrassing for Empress Wang, and it was dangerous for her whole family. The Wang clan had invested a lot in her marriage to the future emperor. They expected that her position as empress would give them better access to government jobs, profitable contracts, and the chance to influence policy. If Wu Jiao kept getting more power at the empress's expense, the Wang family's political investments would lose value and their rivals would gain advantages. Empress Wang's response to this challenge showed that she had certain limits as a political strategist. It also showed the basic differences between her approach to power and Wu Jiao's methods. Instead of trying to compete with Wu Jiao in terms of intelligence or management, the empress focused on highlighting traditional gender roles and what was considered right and wrong. She stood up for traditional values against Wu Jiao's dangerous new ideas. This plan was initially successful with some traditional court officials who were already uneasy about Wu Jiao's unusual role in government. Empress Wang said that it was wrong for a woman who had been a mistress to be involved in discussions about government policy. She said that this went against the most important principles of the imperial court and the Confucian beliefs about what was right and wrong. She said that the emperor should not rely on Wu Ao's advice, as it could be bad for the moral basis of ruling the empire. But Empress Wang's approach had a big problem. It did not offer anything that was as useful as what Wu Jiao had done. The empress might have had her own ideas about Wu Jiao, but she couldn't replace Wu Jiao's administrative skills, political intelligence, or economic insights. The things she said were more about ideas than real benefits, which made them less convincing to an emperor who was dealing with real problems in his government. Wu Jiao knew that Empress Wang was dangerous, but she also knew that it would not help to fight her. If there was any disagreement between the emperor's wife and his advisor, Emperor Gaozong would have to choose to support one of them. The traditional rules of the time made it more likely that the empress would be the one Emperor Gaozong supported. Wu Jiao knew that she needed to get one over on her rival, but she didn't want to make it too obvious. Her solution was to make herself more important than she already was and show that old-fashioned ways of running an empire just don't work. When there were discussions about policy, Wu Jiao often suggested more practical and effective solutions than other advisors, including alternative suggestions to those from the empress's group. When there were problems with the admin, she answered them more quickly and thoroughly than the usual bureaucratic channels. But even more importantly, Wu Jia started to write down and share what she was doing to help government projects succeed. When her suggestions led to more tax money, she made sure the emperor knew it was because of her. When she helped solve problems between countries or stop people in the country from rebelling, she made sure that her help was written down in official documents and that important officials remembered her help. This careful plan for building and showing her value created a strong argument for keeping and growing her influence. This was based on real results, not just ideas. Even officials who were against women taking part in government found it hard to argue against Wu Jia's record of successfully helping to create new laws. In the early 650s, Wu Jiao and Empress Wang were both trying to get the emperor's support and make friends with the other officials in the court. The rivalry between the two women was made even more complicated by the birth of their children, which added a layer of political competition for the role of ruler to the already complex dynamics of the imperial court. Empress Wang gave birth to a daughter in 651, which was disappointing because the next emperor had to be a son. Meanwhile, Wu Jiao had a son in 652 and another son in 653. These births changed the balance of power between the two women. Wu Jiao's sons could become the next emperor, but the empress's daughter could not. The birth of male heirs to Wu Jiao opened up new political possibilities that women had never thought about before. If Emperor Gaozong died, or if he chose one of Wu Jiao's sons to be his successor, she could potentially become the mother of a future emperor. This job could give her long-term political security and influence that was much bigger than her current role as an imperial advisor. But the birth of these children also created new risks. The rules about who should be the next emperor were complicated and sensitive politically. There were set procedures for deciding which sons should be the chosen heirs and which women should be seen as imperial mothers. Wu Jiao's uncertain status as a recalled mistress rather than an official wife made these calculations difficult and provided her enemies with new reasons to argue against her growing influence. Things got even more complicated in 654 when the imperial family was struck by tragedy in a way that would change Wu's career and the course of Chinese history forever. Historians still disagree about the exact details of what happened, but everyone agrees about the consequences. Empress Wang's baby daughter died in a strange way, and Wu Jiao was accused of killing her to get rid of a possible competitor. The accusation was very bad and could even be fatal. If Wu Jiao was found guilty of killing an imperial child, she would be executed immediately, along with all her relatives and associates. The crime was very dangerous because it involved several of the most serious crimes that could be committed in imperial China. These were betraying the royal family, not protecting children in line with the country's moral beliefs, and abusing access to the imperial household that was trusted. But the accusation also showed how desperate Wu's enemies were and that they couldn't challenge her power using normal political methods. The timing and circumstances of the charges suggested that they were more about factional rivalry than real evidence of criminal behavior. This meant that Wu Jiao could turn the crisis to her advantage, as long as she could handle the political aspects of the situation. Her response to the murder accusation would show both her political genius and her willingness to use the most ruthless methods necessary to protect and improve her position. The strategies she used during this crisis would create patterns of behavior that would define her whole career as she rose to become one of the most powerful people in the Chinese Empire. But the specific tactics Wu Jiao used to survive and win over this potentially deadly challenge, and the long-term effects of her choices for herself and the stability of the Tang dynasty, would prove to be even more extraordinary than anything she had done before. The murder accusation against Wu Jiao was the most dangerous moment of her political career, but also showed that her enemy was in a weak position. The charges were based more on what people were saying in court and the bad feelings between different groups of people than on actual evidence. This gave Wu room to maneuver if she could control the story and change public opinion so that it was in her favor. Her first move was bold and unexpected, just like she usually is. Instead of just denying the accusations or asking for protection through the usual channels, Wu Jiao chose to attack her accusers. She started by carefully recording what happened in the time leading up to the baby's death. She also spoke to the servants, doctors, and other people who were in the imperial household at the time. This investigation revealed several facts that made the murder theory look wrong. The child had been ill for several days before dying. They showed symptoms of common childhood diseases that killed many imperial infants, even though they were receiving the best medical care available. Many doctors had looked at the baby and given it treatments that didn't work. Most importantly, Wu Jiao had been with other court officials for most of the time the crime supposedly happened, so it was very unlikely that she could have given poison or been violent. But Wu Jiao understood that facts alone would not be enough to stop people making accusations against her for political reasons. She had to change the whole debate from asking whether she was guilty or not guilty to talking about whether the government was stable and working well. To survive, she had to make herself seem more valuable to the emperor and the empire than her enemies. She did this by suggesting that the accusations against her were part of a larger plan by conservative groups to weaken Emperor Gaozong's power and undo the changes to the way the government was run that made it better than those of the emperors before him. Wu Jiao said that her enemies were using the death of a baby to attack new ways of governing that would take away their traditional privileges and power. This was a clever political move because it changed Wu Jiao from being a criminal to a symbol of government reform. Officials who wanted to modernize the imperial bureaucracy found themselves defending Wu Jiao. They did not necessarily like her, but they knew that attacking her would mean attacking the wider reform plans that they supported. But officials who were against her were seen as being against positive changes to how the government worked. Emperor Gaozong had put a lot of political effort into appointing Wu Jia, and he had personally benefited from her work. He understood the implications of the accusation straight away. If Wu Jiao was removed from government under these circumstances, it would show that traditional groups could stop his decisions about who to hire and what policies to make by creating scandals and moral controversies. If he let accusations based on politics decide who could work in his government, it would hurt his power as emperor. The emperor's response showed that he was a clever politician and that he really wanted to protect Wu Jiao from her enemies. Instead of doing his own investigation, which might be biased because of different groups' interests, he said that the accusations would be looked at through proper legal processes. These processes would be open to court officials and foreign diplomats. This meant that it was much harder for Wu Jiao's enemies to change the evidence or testimony. More importantly, Emperor Gaozong used the investigation as a chance to review and strengthen Wu Jiao's official position in the government. He said that, no matter what happens with the criminal charges, Wu Jiao's help had been so important that her role would be made bigger and official with new titles and responsibilities. This would make her less likely to be targeted in the future. This announcement made it clear what the emperor thought was important and what he expected from the different groups in the court. People in charge who wanted to stay popular with the emperor would need to work with Wu Jiao, not against her. Those who continue to oppose her will find themselves increasingly isolated from the people in charge. The formal investigation into the murder accusations took several months. This involved lots of witnesses being questioned and experts examining physical evidence. The process was designed to be thorough enough to satisfy the doubters, while also showing that the case against Wu Jiao was not very strong. During this time, Wu Jiao carried on with her office work, doing a good job and getting things done quickly. She took part in meetings about policy, wrote government documents, and gave advice on diplomatic and military matters. It was as if the accusations against her were just a temporary distraction. This behavior made people see her as a dedicated public servant who was more interested in good governance than in her own survival. The investigation's final report, issued in early 655, officially cleared Wu Jiao of any wrongdoing in the baby's death. The report said that the child died of natural causes, which could have been made worse by doctors not knowing enough about treating children's illnesses. Most importantly, the report criticized officials who had promoted the murder accusations. It said that they had acted irresponsibly and potentially harmfully to imperial interests. But Wu Jia's vindication came with costs that would shape her future political strategies. The months of controversy had shown how much her enemies did not like her and how far they would go to get rid of her. She understood that even if she survived this attack, she might still be in danger in the future. She also understood that as long as she did not have formal authority that could be easily challenged, she would always be at risk. The solution she came up with was even bolder than her last political moves. Instead of just trying to strengthen her position as an imperial advisor, Wu Jiao began planning to completely change her status within the imperial hierarchy. This would make it much harder and more dangerous for her enemies to attack her in the future. The reason for this change was her relationship with Emperor Gaozong and the growing power she had over who became emperor. Wu Jiao had already shown how good she was at running a department and helping to create new rules. But even though these roles were important, they were still lower down the hierarchy and could be got rid of if things changed politically. She needed to get a form of power that was more permanent and legally protected. The solution she came up with was to use her position as the mother of possible future emperors to demand that she be recognized as an imperial wife instead of just a remembered mistress. This change in status would give her greater legal protections and ceremonial authority, and it would also make her sons legitimate candidates for imperial succession. This would give her a long-term stake in the dynasty's future. But to make this change, Wu Jiao had to get past the many years of tradition and rules about royal marriages and who would be king. No emperor in Chinese history had ever made a woman who was not his wife empress. This would have meant a lot of people in the royal court did not like it. Wu Jiao started getting ready for this campaign by gradually getting support from important groups whose support would be very important for success. She got on well with military commanders. They liked her ideas about planning battles and how to use supplies. She made friends with the governors of the provinces. They liked how she understood the local economies and problems. Most importantly, she made her connections with younger court officials stronger. These officials were more open to new ways of running the country and less committed to traditional rules that stopped women from being involved in politics. This meant that Wu Jiao had to show each group why they needed her in a way that they could understand and that was important to them. Military officers needed proof that her influence led to better funding and planning for their campaigns. The people in charge of the province wanted to know that her suggestions would make it easier to collect taxes and make the local area more stable. The court officials needed to be sure that supporting her would help their own career goals and political aims. Wu Jiao did these things by running a series of successful policy initiatives. These showed her administrative skills and also made her popular with important groups. She created new ways to supply and move soldiers around, which made frontier campaigns against Turkish and Korean forces more effective. She came up with new ways to collect taxes and develop farming that increased the money the empire made while reducing the burden on local populations. She introduced new ways of evaluating and promoting staff that made government work more appealing to talented people from different backgrounds. Each of these things was important as part of Wu Jiao's wider political plan. They provided concrete evidence of her value to the imperial administration, which made it harder for her opponents to argue that her influence was purely personal rather than professional. They created networks of officials and military officers who had a personal interest in increasing her power. Most importantly, they showed that Wu Jiao's way of governing was better than the old methods. This gave Emperor Gaozong a good reason to support her becoming more than just a personal friend or loyal servant. By late 655, Wu Jiao felt confident enough in her political position to begin the final phase of her campaign to be officially recognized as empress. This would mean she would have to directly challenge Empress Wang and the powerful family networks that supported the existing imperial marriage. This would be the most dangerous gamble of her career. If she succeeded, she would become extremely powerful and safe. But if she failed, she and her children might be sent away or killed. The first step in this campaign came from an unexpected source, showing that Wu Jiao understood the mindsets of the emperors and the politics of the court very well. Instead of asking Emperor Gaozong to divorce his current wife, She started to gently ask whether the marriage was helping him with his duties as emperor and his personal well-being. Wu Da's approach was indirect but systematic. During policy discussions, she would sometimes say that the emperor could be more effective if he had a partner who really understood how complicated running the empire was. In private, she would talk about how worried she was about the emperor's health and how stressed he was. She said he needed someone to talk to and support him during the hard times of his rule. These conversations were carefully designed to make people unhappy with the emperor's current domestic arrangements without appearing to promote her own interests directly. Wu wanted Emperor Gaozong to decide for himself that his marriage to Empress Wang was not working. He wanted her to look like the one who wanted to change things, not him. The plan went exactly as planned. Emperor Gaozong thought about how he had been more interested in talking to Wu Jiao than Empress Wang. He liked the talks with Wu because they were interesting and helpful for his work. He didn't like the talks with Empress Wang as they were too formal and not very useful. The difference between the two became clearer and clearer, and he was getting more and more annoyed because he realized that Wu Jiao was much more satisfying and supportive than his official wife. This growing dissatisfaction was encouraged by Wu Jia's continued demonstrations of her administrative competence and political insight. In the winter of 655, the imperial government was tested in a series of crises. These crises showed that the government was not able to deal well with unexpected problems. Heavy flooding in the south has caused problems for farmers and has made some people homeless. Tensions between the kingdoms of Korea got worse, and this led to military conflicts. These conflicts needed the kingdoms to send their troops and supplies quickly. There were rebellions in the western territories that needed to be stopped quickly. When faced with crises, Wu's responses were quicker, more thorough, and better than those from the government. Her suggestions for dealing with flooding were based on her real-world experience of farming economics, rather than on theoretical knowledge from old books. When she was looking at military situations, she understood how logistics and supply chain management worked. She didn't just understand the theory of warfare. The way she dealt with rebellions within the country showed that she had a good understanding of the politics of the different regions and the relationships between different ethnic groups. She was much more sophisticated in her approach than simply using the same old ways of punishing people. Emperor Gaozong noticed that Wu Jiao's advice was better and more useful than that of his other advisors, including those who were supposed to be experts in their fields. This made him more and more frustrated with the limitations of his current advisory system and more appreciative of Wu Jiao's unique contributions to effective governance. The difference was especially clear when he compared Wu Jiao's abilities with those of Empress Wang, who didn't play a significant role in dealing with any of the government's problems. The Empress was expected to focus on ceremonial duties and household management. These activities seemed trivial and irrelevant compared to the life and death decisions required for imperial administration. Emperor Gaozong started to wonder if his home life was right for someone who needed lots of help to rule the biggest and most complicated empire in the world. Wu Wa watched the emperor closely, ready to talk to him about what to do next. She knew that she would only have one chance to ask to be made empress, and that the timing, how she presented her request, and the reasons for it would all be very important for it to be successful. Everything she had achieved in the last 10 years had been to get her ready for this one important moment. The conversation finally happened in early 656 during a private meeting where Wu Jiao and Emperor Gaozong were talking about how well the recent changes to policy were working. The discussion then moved on to bigger questions about how well the government was doing its job and how the emperor needed help to manage his responsibilities. Wu Jiao started by saying how hard things were for Emperor Gaozong as the leader of the Tang Empire. He explained that being the emperor was much more difficult than it had been in the past, when China was smaller and less developed. She said that in the past, emperors have been able to rely on simpler governmental structures and more limited advisory systems, but that today's challenges required more sophisticated and comprehensive approaches to decision-making and policy implementation. From this starting point, she began to question whether the emperor's personal and family life was good enough to support his professional duties. Wuzhou said that good leadership at the imperial level needed more than just smart advisors and administrators. It also needed trusted friends who could help with the constant decisions and problems that came with being an emperor. The criticism of Empress Wang was subtle, but it was clear what it meant. Wuzhou said that the emperor needed a wife who could help him rule the empire. He said that this wife should understand how the government worked and be able to take part in discussions about the country's plans. The current empress, whatever her good qualities, simply did not have the knowledge, experience, and skills needed for the role. Emperor Gaozong's response showed that Wu Jiao's months of careful preparation had worked. He admitted that he had been thinking along the same lines. He knew that his government job was not supported well enough by his current personal life. He admitted that his most productive and satisfying conversations about imperial business were with Wu rather than with his official wife. He found this frustrating on a personal level and inefficient in a professional sense. Even more importantly, Emperor Gaozong started to think about the practical and political effects of changing his marital status to better match his personal relationships with his governmental needs. He asked Wu Jiao to research the historical examples and legal steps needed to divorce Empress Wang and choose a more suitable person to be the imperial wife. This request was the breakthrough that Wu Jiao had spent years working towards. The emperor wasn't just thinking about her idea. He was planning to put it into action and was asking for her help in managing the complicated process that would be needed. Her change from being a mistress to empress was now possible. It was becoming a practical project that would change the structure of the government and society in China. But Wu Jiao also understood that the most difficult and dangerous phase of her campaign was just beginning. It was only the first step to make Emperor Gaozong support her becoming empress. She would have to overcome strong opposition from important people in the court, traditional religious leaders, and traditional views about women throughout the empire. The political and cultural problems she faced were huge. They would test all the skills she had learned and all the connections she had made during her amazing rise to power. The fight to become empress would happen in many different areas at the same time. This would mean that Wu Jiao would have to show not just what she could do on her own, but also that she could work well with other people and deal with difficult problems between organizations. If she was successful, she would be the most powerful woman in Chinese history. But if she failed, she might lose everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The stakes could not have been higher, and the outcome would determine not just Wu Jiao's personal fate, but the future direction of the Tang dynasty and the role of women in Chinese political life for centuries to come. The campaign to make Wu Jiao empress started in spring 656. It was the most complicated political project in Tang dynasty history. Wu Jiao knew that this change needed much more than just the emperor's approval. She had to break down the old legal rules, religious beliefs, and social customs that meant she could not become queen. Her first challenge was to find and deal with the people who would try to stop her once people knew what she was planning. The most dangerous resistance would come from Empress Wang's family, the powerful Wang clan. They had invested a lot in their daughter's position as imperial wife. They would fight hard to keep their influence and stop their rivals getting the ultimate power. Wu Jiao started by looking closely at the Wang family's political connections, noting who they were allied with, what their economic interests were, and what weaknesses they had in their strategy. She discovered that the clan's power came from a few different sources, And these could be weak points that could be attacked through careful political maneuvering. The Wang family had several government contracts for military supplies and infrastructure projects. Some relationships made a lot of money for the people involved, but also made some people dependent on others, who then took advantage of them. They had a lot of influence in the imperial bureaucracy. This was in specific departments and regions where family members had important jobs. This meant that they could stop important things from happening. This could be done through changes to the way the government worked. Most importantly, their political group included several ambitious people whose loyalty was based on getting something out of it for themselves, rather than being personally committed, which meant they might be tempted to leave and join a different group if they got a better offer from them. Wu Jiao had a plan to make it hard for the W clan to stop her from becoming more powerful. She started by finding other companies that could do the government contracts, showing that their services weren't essential and that competition could improve quality and lower costs. She started staff reviews in the departments where the Wang family had the most influence. She said this was to make the departments more efficient, but really it was to replace their allies with officials who would support her goals. She also started building relationships with younger members of the Wang family who were unhappy with the limited opportunities for promotion they had within the traditional clan hierarchy. These people were offered the chance to get promoted more quickly and to take on more responsibility in exchange for not taking sides, or even for supporting during the next leadership crisis. Wu Jiao knew that it was often a better idea to divide her enemies than to try to defeat them directly. While working to weaken the Wang family's political position, Wu Jiao also started a clever advertising campaign to prepare people for her unexpected rise to power. This meant she had to deal with the basic cultural and religious reasons why most Chinese people thought that a woman becoming emperor was not possible. The main problem was that Confucian political philosophy clearly said that women should not be in charge of the country. They thought that if women were in charge, it would cause social problems and the end of the royal family. Buddhist and Taoist religious traditions were more flexible about gender roles in some situations, but they also had teachings that were generally understood to support male political dominance. Wu Jiao had to come up with new ways to understand these philosophical and religious traditions. She wanted to use them to help her reach her goals, not to stop them. Her approach to this challenge showed the advanced knowledge she had gained during her years of study and observation. Wu Jiao started asking for people to do research projects that looked again at old texts and historical examples to find proof of female political authority. She paid for conferences and discussions among court intellectuals about the right way to understand ancient ideas about governance and leadership. These academic projects were carefully designed to look like real academic research, not like political propaganda. Wuja understood that attacking traditional beliefs directly would cause people to resist, but that changing these beliefs in a subtle way, as if they were new discoveries, might gradually change people's views. The research projects she sponsored began to reveal forgotten historical examples of successful female rulers in Chinese history. They also reinterpreted classical texts that had been traditionally understood as prohibiting female authority and developed new theological arguments about the relationship between gender and political legitimacy. People learned about these findings through the imperial court and scholarly networks. This made it easier for people to accept Wu Jiao being made empress. At the same time, Wu tried to get the military to support her campaign. She knew that in imperial China, the most important political position was the one who could command the army when needed. Her years of involvement in strategic planning and military logistics had given her a lot of contacts among professional officers who valued competence over traditional protocol. She started building relationships with important military leaders especially those who had benefited from her ideas for improving how the army was run. These officers had seen how Wu Jiao's insights had improved how well they worked together. This made them more willing to support her political advancement, despite any worries they might have had about gender and what this would mean for the future. Wu's way of getting military support was practical and focused on getting results. Instead of asking for people to be loyal to her ideas, she showed the military that she could be useful to them by improving funding, working better together, and helping with logistics. The officers who worked with her knew that if she got a higher rank, she would still be able to use her expertise and influence. While her removal might result in less competent administration of military affairs, she also began developing plans for potential violent resistance to her elevation, understanding that some opponents might resort to armed rebellion or assassination attempts rather than accept female rule. These preparations included finding trustworthy military units to protect the imperial court, setting up safe ways to talk to each other so that they could work together to defend themselves, and planning how to get her family and important supporters to safety if they had to leave quickly. The military part of Wawo's campaign was difficult because they had to keep things secret while also creating support networks. If she prepares too much, her enemies might spot her and attack first. But if she doesn't prepare properly, she could be in danger. She had to be open with her allies, but keep information secret from her enemies. This was difficult and had to be changed often as the situation in politics changed. In the summer of 656, Wu Jiao's campaign reached its most active phase. This was because Emperor Gaozong had decided to divorce Empress Wang and make his relationship with his chosen successor official. The emperor's decision to move forward caused a political crisis straight away. This would test all of Wu Jiao's preparation and strategic planning. The first big disagreement happened when important court officials found out what the emperor wanted to do and asked to meet with him to say that they did not agree with him. These officials said that divorcing Empress Wang would go against the most important principles of the imperial court and traditional Chinese beliefs, and could cause problems for the dynasty and make people question the emperor's authority in his own country and in other countries. The meetings between Emperor Gaozong and his senior advisors were often tense and sometimes even hostile. Some officials said they would rather resign than serve under an empress whom they considered not to be legitimate. The emperor found himself in a difficult position. He wanted to do what he thought was right, but he also had to follow the rules of the government. Wu Jiao was very important in helping Emperor Gaozong deal with these problems. He gave the emperor lots of information about the background of each official, what they wanted to do, and what they were weak at. She helped him see which opposition was based on strong beliefs versus personal or group interests. This helped him to create different plans for dealing with different types of resistance. For officials who were against this because they believed in the right way for the government to do things, Emperor Gaozong explained how getting Wu Jiao a higher position would be good for the government. He spoke about her past successes in helping to create policies and said that good leadership meant having the best possible advisors and partners, no matter what their gender was. For officials who seemed to be resistant mainly because of their loyalty to particular groups or their own ambitions, the emperor took a firmer stance. He made it clear that if they continued to oppose him, it would be seen as disloyalty to the emperor and dealt with accordingly. He started moving some officials who didn't agree with him to less important jobs, and he promoted others who supported his plans for marriage. This made it clear what would happen if different political choices were made. The religious side of the opposition was particularly difficult because it involved basic questions about the relationship between the rulers and religious beliefs. Buddhist and Taoist religious leaders said that making Wu Jia empress would break spiritual rules about how the world works, and that this would cause bad things to happen to the whole empire. Wu's response to people who disagreed with her because of their religion showed that she understood how spiritual authority worked in Chinese society. Instead of attacking religious leaders directly, she tried to divide them by promoting different interpretations of relevant doctrines and supporting religious figures who were willing to endorse her rise to power. She had new translations of Buddhist texts made that focused on compassion and wisdom rather than gender as the most important qualities for political leadership. She gave money to scholars who studied history and argued that in order to keep things in balance, old traditions sometimes needed to be turned around. They said that this meant that it was necessary for women to rule instead of men, because men had become too powerful. She supported Confucian scholars who reinterpreted traditional ideas about governance. These scholars focused on competence and virtue rather than gender as the most important requirements for legitimate authority. These debates about religion and philosophy provided a way for officials and citizens to support Wu Jiao without having to give up their traditional beliefs about women in politics. The discussions between experts provided them with good arguments they could use to explain their support for very unusual changes in imperial protocol. The impact of Wu Jiao's rise to power on other countries also had to be carefully managed. Neighboring kingdoms and states that paid taxes to the Tan Court were watching what was happening there closely. They were looking for any signs of weakness or instability that they could use to their advantage. If people thought there was chaos or bad leaders in China, other countries might invade or start rebellions in the areas around the border. Wu Jiao addressed these concerns by emphasizing that the country's foreign policy and military readiness would continue in the same way. She worked with Emperor Gaozong to make sure that when the Tang administration spoke to other countries, it focused on how strong and stable the government was, instead of talking about how the changes to the imperial marriage were new and never happened before. She worked with military leaders to make sure that the army was always ready to defend the country, showing that even though the government was changing, this would not make it more likely that other countries would attack. Her approach to international relations during this period showed that she understood that how other countries saw China's strength was as important as how the Chinese government supported her rise to power. If she looks weak or divided, other countries might try to challenge her, which would make it hard for her to get power and let her enemies use the issue of national security to gather support. By autumn 656, the different parts of Wu's campaign were coming together. This was a very important moment for Emperor Gaozong, who had to make some final decisions about the divorce and remarriage. The preparations by the political, military, religious, and international leaders made it possible for her to be elevated. But putting this into practice would still require navigating significant risks and possible complications. The timing of the final decision was influenced by several factors that were beyond Wu Jiao's direct control, but that she had anticipated and prepared for during her strategic planning. Supporters of Empress Wang were getting more and more desperate as they saw what was happening. This made them more likely to try to stop Wu's campaign or make it look like they wanted it to be faster. Rumors and guesses about the emperor's plans were making it hard to keep the marriage plan secret. Many officials and court observers knew that big changes were being thought about. This made them feel like they had to either quickly put the plans into action or forget about them. The reason for this was to stop information from being shared that could be used against them by people who were against the plans. Most importantly, Wu Jiao's position was becoming increasingly difficult as her enemies realized that they were running out of time to stop her from being promoted. The longer she stayed in her current uncertain position, the more likely she was to be targeted by attacks before she could get the legal protections that would come with being officially recognized as empress. All these things came together to make a situation where waiting was more dangerous than doing something, which made Wu Jiao and Emperor Gaozong how to speed up their plan, and get ready for the final showdown that would decide not just her own fate, but also the future of imperial power in China. The moment of decision came in late 656 when Emperor Gaozong said he wanted to meet with the important people in the government to talk about changing the rules about royal marriages. This announcement made all the secret talks that had happened over many months public. It turned them into a political crisis. Everyone had to say where they stood and accept the results of their choices. Wu Jiao knew that this council meeting was the result of over 10 years of work. If she was successful, she would become empress and be able to change Chinese society in the way she wanted. If she failed, she would probably be sent away or killed, along with everyone who had helped her. The stakes could not have been higher, and the outcome would depend on her ability to deal with difficult political situations while also appearing humble, which was still expected of women in imperial Chinese society. She would need to be both bold and subtle, confident and careful, in control and polite as she did her best political performance of her amazing career. The Imperial Council, which would decide Wu's fate, was set to meet in the stunning Hall of Supreme Harmony. This was the place where the most important decisions in Chinese imperial history had been made for generations.